Well, the Democrats took the Senate, and then they didn't. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, Arizona Senator Kyrsten Sinema announced this morning, as we record this, that she is no longer a Democrat. She is now an independent. It is unclear if she's going to be like Bernie Sanders and some other guy up in the Northeast who are independents but caucus with the Democrats. She said she would not caucus with the Republicans, but she dodged the question about whether she would be caucusing with the Democrats, which essentially lets you have your cake and eat it too as an independent because you pretend you're independent, but you're actually a Democrat. She has not nailed that down, but she basically said she's sick of the political partisan stuff, and she is officially no longer a Democrat. So that 51-49 margin, they're actually counting Bernie Sanders in that. They're counting, I can't remember the other guy. He was a much less well-known guy from Maine, I think. But anyway, all this made me think, and Steve Green, tell me if this leaped to your mind when you heard it too. My first thought was, Senator Manchin, phone your office.
Right. And here's the thing. I personally like Kyrsten Sinema. She seems like a fun and genuinely funny lady, and you don't get a whole lot of that in the United States Senate. And also my dear friend and PJ Media colleague, Stephen Cruiser, who's a Tucson guy, swears that Sinema is going to be his next wife. So we'll see how that pans out. Now that she's no longer a Democrat, maybe his odds have gone up a little. We'll see. As for Manchin, man, Sinema has pretty much got to caucus with the Democrats, or she won't get any committee assignments. So,
well, they said she's keeping her committee assignments, even though she has not declared that she's going to caucus with the Democrats.
Well, that is a twist. Interesting. So maybe that's a bribe on the part of Chuck Schumer. This really does put the ball back in Manchin's court. I mean, he spent the last 2 years just wrangling whatever he could out of the Senate to buy his vote. It's how they got the awful Inflation Reduction Act passed earlier this year. Man, if I'm Joe Manchin, all I'm thinking is, Schumer did a Lucy in the football on Manchin to get the Inflation Reduction Act passed. The side deal was you vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, and we'll do this other thing that'll, I believe it was restore some coal mining to Virginia. I can't remember the details about it. Yeah, but Schumer pulled the rug out from under him, took the football away as soon as Manchin voted, and they got the thing passed. So if I'm Joe Manchin right now, politically, I don't know exactly how this is going to play out, but I am imagining the sheer evil hand-wringing glee of Manchin watching Chuck Schumer sweat.
Bill Whittle, it seems that one of Kyrsten Sinema's complaints was that the parties are being driven by their most extreme factions to further polarize the country. And basically, most Democrats in the Senate or most Republicans in the Senate may self-describe, if they were privately, willing to confide in you, that they are more centrist, but they can't act that way in public because their leadership or the most vocal members of their caucus are essentially driving them to the fringes. And she basically was saying, I'm not going to play that game anymore. This makes me wonder what would happen if a wave of senators and members of Congress started saying, you know what? Me too. Hashtag me too.
You beat my answer. Yes, my first thought when you mentioned this, because I hadn't heard the news, was how many other people will take this path. We saw, despite the disappointing outcome of the midterm elections, there were significant movements of Blacks, Hispanics, traditional Democratic voters. We thought they were moving to the Republican Party, but they are certainly moving out of the Democratic Party, right? So it's not so much that they're becoming Republicans as they no longer can stand to be Democrats, and the more that that they reveal about what's going on in our schools and the teachers conspiring to issue all this ideology, specifically without the parents knowing, is driving more and more people away from the Democratic Party because it's become, kind of a extreme party. And so the question now becomes, if you are a Democrat senator and you declare that you're elected as a Democrat, you declare yourself a Republican, or vice versa, you're perceived as a traitor. But the nice thing about independent is it's kind of a halfway house, you know? It's like, yeah, you've left our lines, but you haven't gone over to the enemy exactly. You know, maybe you're a deserter, but you're not a traitor. And there's a big difference between those two things, right? So I wonder how many other people are going to do it. And as the Democratic Party, if they continue on with these social engineering policies that are so incredibly unpopular, there'll be more pressure on those reasonable Democrats to declare independence. But I got to tell you, my real thought was, the second you told me that, the first thought that flew into my mind would be, how different would our world would be if we had listened to George Washington and everybody was an independent, that there were no political parties, right? That you basically judged each individual person on their on what their particular platform was. Because as I was arguing in the weeks after the midterms, the Democrats have a brand and they vote for the brand. That's what allows them to vote for a guy who can't finish sentences. Yep. He's a part of the brand. And they know whoever is going to be doing the job of Fetterman, because it's not going to be Fetterman, but they know that the person doing that job is going to hold the same values that they have. So they vote for the guy. If you take away parties, then the whole system realigns. Now, look, the thing about that is that is a consummation maybe devoutly to be wished, but it is a free country, and in a free country you can form political parties. In a free country you can form unions. You can do all of these things. So I'm certainly not in favor of like banning parties, because I don't believe you legislate those kind of things. But if it turns out that one or the other political party starts going so far off the rails that more and more people no longer consider themselves to be bound by party discipline. And that's essentially the guts of what her statement is, right? She's now saying that I am no longer going to be bound by party discipline and be expected to vote against things that I don't believe in because I'm a Democrat. If that is a trend that I would love to see accelerate. And you only need 4 or 5 people to completely reconfigure the Senate if they become independents.
Yeah, Washington's warnings against faction notwithstanding, and Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson's vigorous efforts on behalf of faction shortly thereafter notwithstanding, they were really the rallying cry for both the factions that formed back then in the late 1780s, 1790s. That the parties these days aren't really ideological anchors as they once used to be thought of anyway. They're more, like you said, a brand. They're shorthand for something. It's what allows you to walk into a voting booth and go, well, I don't know about 75% of the people on this ballot, so in the races where I don't recognize any names, I'll pick
straight
that
B's,
guy.
Straight R's.
Yeah, whatever, from that party. I think most people fancy themselves as independent, even if they're, dyed in the wool. Even if they always vote Republican or always vote Democrat, in their minds, they will say, I vote for the person. I don't vote for the party. Yes, I'm a Democrat and I haven't voted for a Republican in 40 years, but I vote for the person. And Republicans will say the same thing. It's funny because I'm at this point, Texas does not require me to be registered as a party member, so I'm not a registered party member. But, as you go through the ballot, you're okay, I don't know anybody in this judicial race here. So what are the odds that if I pick somebody at random, it's going to be a good choice? I guess I'll pick the registered Republican. So there's that. There's the shorthand. There's the brand function of it. In a sense, I think there's a place in government for faction that unites around issues and ideas and then puts itself back together when we're talking about other issues and other ideas. It's kind of like the Hollywood model of filmmaking where you come together with a group of people, you put forward one vision, you get it on the screen, and then you break up and you gather with somebody else and put forward another vision on the screen. And so you're equally devoted to making that horror movie with this guy as you are into making that heartwarming, yeah, it's a dog story, that heartwarming rom-com with another guy. And I'd almost welcome that, where they said, look, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat. You come to me with a persuasive argument, you make your case, I have my set of values, and I'll make a decision based on that. And I think what's better about that is that the first model, the political party model, requires you to sacrifice things that are fundamental to what you believe and who you are, because you're in the business of trading votes. I will vote with you on this issue if you vote with me on that issue. And then just so you can stay in the camp, so to speak. I would much rather have somebody say, as I said, frankly, when I was a county commissioner, I would say to my Democrat colleagues on the board, I would say, look, when they came to me and they say, well, maybe if you would support this, we'd be more open to listening to that or whatever. I say, look, I want you to vote your conscience on each issue. And I plan to do the same. The way I would like you to vote on this thing that's important to me is because you're persuaded that I'm right and that you agree with me. And so that you can stand with your head high before the voters and say, look, I know I didn't vote with the caucus, but I voted what I thought was right. And this is why I think I admire Kyrsten Sinema's move to go independent. I hope this is what she's talking about. I hope she's saying, look, I plan to evaluate issues. I'm done with trading votes. I'm done with being pushed around by party leadership. But the fact that she kept her committee assignments makes me a little bit nervous.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question, because obviously I don't think parties are going anywhere. I mean, there's a reason they're there. There's a reason they've been there for 250 years, because the country is, I think it's more than 100 years old,
pretty close.
And so that's there. But just think about this. When I was doing the Cold War series, I said the genius of Richard Nixon was he took what was a two-party war between the United States and the Soviet Union, and he completely shattered that structure by going to China. Now it's a three-party.
Yeah. Now
it's a three-party balance. And Russia and China have no love for each other. They're ancient enemies. So now the calculations become much more important. That was what the genius of Nixon was. Yeah. He says, we've got this communist bloc of Russia and China. There is a way to split them off. So he goes to China. So now we've got a three-part Cold War. So the question then becomes, everybody's saying, I'm going to start a new party, blah, blah, blah. I did an interview with Dave Rubin 5 years ago now or something, and he's become considerably more conservative since then. But when we were talking, the subject came up. I said, Dave, you could take 10 of your followers and I could take 10 of my followers. You're a liberal, I'm a conservative. And I guarantee you, if you put us in a room for 2 hours, we could come up with a platform that 85% of Americans would vote for.
Yeah.
Right? 85% would vote for this platform. And the only people that would be excluded would be the extremists on both sides of the spectrum. I still maintain that's true. So if it turns out that these parties continue to drift further and further apart, the inconceivable may someday be conceivable. Obviously, if you try to take the Republican Party and splinter off the conservatives, then you're going to lose. Right? You've taken the Republican vote, cut it in half. If you take the Democrat vote and you try to split off the progressives and the Greens from the mainstream working class Democrats, then they're going to lose. But if you were to have a third party whose brand was moderation, the middle, the sensible compromise, you could at least make the mathematical argument that yes, you'd be pulling votes, but you'd probably be pulling them both from both parties. So that is something I would like to see our politics reconfigured. This obviously isn't working, and nobody's happy with it. So anything that shows any kind of a tectonic movement in the structure, rather than just, here's one case of one politician doing one thing in one cycle. If this is a harbinger of a potential wave, then I don't see anything but good coming out of this because nobody's happy with this.
I think this is kind of the difference in a culture like one that we've traditionally had in the United States versus, let's say, in a culture that's much more patriarchal and tribal, where, in the United States, I have to woo a woman to get her to become my wife. In some of these other cultures, at least historically, it's a deal worked out among the parents, and it really doesn't matter if the woman likes you. And so if Chuck Schumer knows that Kyrsten Sinema is in his pocket, then he behaves in a different manner than if he's bringing up legislation he knows Sinema won't like, and she's not in his pocket. Then he has to go to her. He has to woo her. He has to persuade her. He has to somehow prevail upon her because she stood up and said, I will vote my conscience. And he can't now make an appeal that's based on something other than conscience.
And now there are consequences for screwing guys who you made a deal with, like we mentioned just a few minutes ago.
Joe Manchin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You want to screw him over, you make him a promise, and you back out on the promise once you get his vote. Well, guess what? He may decide that it's no longer in his interest to be beholden to a liar and a cheat who's cheating on his own.
Yeah.
Not living up to his own people.
Keep an eye on Manchin. This could be very interesting.
Well, just to put a button on this, I think that Kyrsten Sinema, like a good politician, sees where the tide is flowing, and she's getting out in front of it. And I think she sees.
So does that?
What's that?
I'm sorry. So if you assume that Sanders is an independent in name only, does that mean that if she acts like an independent, then it would be a 49?
No, it'd be 50-50.
Yeah.
Because it's 51-49.
If she doesn't caucus,
49 of each, and then 2 independents, right? Sanders is one of them.
Yeah, but Sanders caucuses with the Democrats, so they're counting him in the win column.
Okay, so instead of it being a 51-49 Senate, now it is a potential 50-50 Senate.
Yeah, assuming that she does not
depending on the issue.
Assuming she does not decide to caucus with the Democrats, although she still has that string of committee appointments, that are supposedly going to stick. So there's some influence that Democratic leadership has over her.
Well, it would be a 50-49 one Senate. But if Manchin were to go independent and not caucus with the Democrats, then you're looking at a 49-49 Senate, which is where the deal making would get very, very intricate.
And think about the power that those two would have then, right? They would be the most courted people in the world.
And Sinema is a true moderate, and Manchin is a moderate when he thinks it'll get him what he wants.
And honestly, I don't need all the politicians to stand up and say, I'm no longer a whatever party I used to be in. But I do long for the day when somebody can stand up and say, look, I'm a registered Republican or I'm a registered Democrat. I've run as such. I've been elected as such. But I need to draw a line in the sand right now because I think that the party discipline has exceeded the bounds of logic and the bounds of what is good for the public. So let me just say right here, no matter the cost to me personally, I will vote my conscience on legislation going forward, and I'm asking you as the public to hold me accountable to this. Now, there's going to be disagreement. I'm going to vote for things you don't like. I'm going to vote for things you do like. But I will not run ads against the next person to challenge me that basically says, oh, he's walking in lockstep and I'm not, when I, in fact, am walking in lockstep as well. I want to be able to go home to my children or my grandchildren and look them in the eye and say, your father or your mother, your grandfather, your grandmother does what he thinks is right, regardless of the consequences. And when my head hits the pillow at night, I sleep soundly because I have a clean conscience. That's all I want from politicians, which tells you why I'm a crazy dreamer. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.